The first 5 minutes of a game may not seem like a big deal, but they are crucially important, and if you get them wrong, you could handicap yourself for the rest of the game and just generally set yourself up for a bad time. So I'm on this randomly generated map here just to show that this will generally work on every map with a couple exceptions, but if you follow this, you should generally be good to go. And I paused as soon as my commander warped in. I don't even think he's actually in the game yet, just to show you the exact first moves for the first 5 to 10 minutes or so. So if I hit play, the first thing we're going to want to do is build a land factory, and already I actually want to slow this down without pausing it. I built it in between these two mass extractors right here, and that's because you get an adjacency bonus for building production units such as mass or energy. You get adjacency bonus when having those next to factories or radars or shields, etc. So if you do have a chance to build some in between two mass extractors like this, it's generally better to do that just because you get a slight efficiency bonus, and in the early game, everything matters. If there aren't two mass extractors right next to each other, don't worry about it, it's fine. Just build it next to one mass extractor and you'll still be getting a nice efficiency bonus. After that, you're going to want to do two things. You're going to want to queue up some units from this land factory, and you're going to want to queue up some orders with your commander. I'm going to start with the commander. And generally, you're going to want to build all of these core economy points or mass points with your commander, as well as some starting factories just to get your economy going. So while you might seem tempted to start off by building all of these mass extractors actually take energy over here. They take energy just to be on. So whenever you're building a mass extractor, you're going to want to build a power generator first. So I'm just going to queue up this one. And then it might seem odd, but we're actually going to want to queue up 2 power generators and then queue up 2 mass extractors. And the reason for that, it probably won't make a huge difference if you do 1 and 1, but this power bar goes down pretty quickly in the early game, so getting these 2 power generators up and running sooner will help to fill this before there's any energy production being consumed by these mass extractors. And then we're going to want to apply that same logic to all of the core mass extractors or mexes. So I'm going to queue up another 2 power generators by holding the shift button so he adds it to the queue, and then I'll tell him to build this one. And if you notice, this one is actually outside this dark gold range, which means if I just tell him to build it, he's going to walk all the way right up to it until he's face to face, and then he's going to start building it. That's actually really inefficient. It adds up a lot over time if he has to walk all the way over here to build that, then walk all the way over here to build this one. It actually can take like 20-30 seconds to get all of these filled out, which is just totally wasted time. If your opponent gets a factory up in 30 seconds, that's literally just 30 seconds of your commander walking when he could have a factory up. So in general, try to get a rough sense of how big this build range is and tell him to walk somewhat close enough. Maybe we want to move this a little bit closer. By the way, I did that by holding the shift button and then left clicking, and once you think it's about right, then you can go ahead and queue up the next one. And let's just go ahead and finish off the core mass extractors. I'll tell him to walk back over here, and again, might be tempting to build this outright, but don't forget to just build a power generator first and then go ahead and build the last mass extractor. And as far as your commander is concerned, it's generally a good idea to build around 3 factories with him before sending him off to the front lines. And a land factory, which is generally a good second thing to go with, is going to be producing units at about 20 power per second. And I'm just going to go ahead and pause so I can explain a little bit. Because it's producing units at about 20 power a second, if you see over here on the right, this power generator, it produces 20 power a second. And what all that means is you kind of want to apply the same logic that you do to the mass extractors. You want to apply that to land factories as well. So if I want to build another land factory, it's tempting to just go and build it, but just build the power generator first before you build this so you don't have to worry about power stalling. Power stalling is really bad because if you stall on power, if this bar gets to 0, all of your mass extractors produce less efficiently. Any shielding you have turns off, radar turns off, stalling on power is really bad. As opposed to mass extractors, if you stall on mass, you're just out of mass, nothing really catastrophic happens. But try to never stall on power, you always want to build power first, and that should be generally a good rule of thumb. So with that in mind, let me go ahead and unpause, and now I'm going to go ahead and queue up a power generator and a land factory just like so, and I'm actually going to move this down by a couple just for a little bit later in the game when we ring our mass extractors with mass storage, just to leave some room for that. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. I have a whole tutorial series on economy. I'll link that up top or down below. Definitely recommend going to check that out. Okay, and it looks like this is actually going to finish before I get to the third factory, even though it's on -10. It's okay, well, I'll get to that in a second. I do want to go ahead and queue up this third factory though, and just for fun, let's make this third factory an air factory. And you might be thinking, okay, I'll queue up a PGen and then put an air factory next to it. Well, not so fast. Air units are generally a lot more power hungry than land units, so while land units produce around 20 energy per second, air units generally produce around 80 energy per second. And since each power generator yields around 20, that means you're going to want to build 4 of these guys for each air factory you're doing. So let's go ahead and I'll build it somewhere over here. Again, let's just move our commander somewhere where he'll have range to do this. And then all you need to do is just queue up 1, 2, 3, and then I usually put one on the corner like this, and then go ahead and build up your air factory. And just like that, let's just pause and just recap on everything we've done. I guess I won't pause because it makes it dark, but it looks like there's a lot going on here. Honestly, it's not too complicated. All we're doing is just building some mass extractors and building 2 factories. And all we're doing is just making sure they all have enough energy to run. So mass extractors and land factories, both just build 1 power generator before you build each of those. And if you want to build an air factory, just go ahead and build 4 power generators. Once you get all this with your commander, it looks like a lot is going on. Go ahead and send him to the front lines, somewhere you think that you'll meet up with the enemy. And that's because while the commander is about as good as a couple engineers, he's about as good as 20 tanks. So yes, you want to use him to build your initial base, but as soon as you get all this built up, he's going to be about 10 times more efficient on the front lines as a tank than he is going to be as an engineer. So get him to the front, probably somewhere around here is where I'll meet the enemy. So let's have him build this just for fun, and then he'll basically just be hanging out here on the front lines, and you can use him as you need him. At this point, your commander is good to go. He has all his orders. So what about this first factory? Well, early on, expansion is the name of the game. You can build as many power generators as you want anywhere on the map, but you can't do that with mass extractors. So what that means is the game generally flows around these mass extractors of you trying to capture and defend them. And early on, the more you capture, the better. So we're just going to start with at least 5 engineers. I usually go with 6, and I'll tell you exactly what I do with them. But let me just go ahead and speed this back up so we at least have some engineers to work with. So our first engineer is going to basically just expand the map. And what that means is I'm just going to go to tell him to just capture mass extractors. Just scroll out, go look at where there's a bunch of mass extractors, and just go tell him to build them. I'm actually going to slow down again so I can zoom in on this first guy. All I have him doing is just going to capture these ones right here, and maybe since this is on the front lines, maybe we tell this guy to build a radar over here. I just used the hotkey for that, but radar is always a good thing to have. Your units can shoot farther than they can see, so you don't want to forget to build any radar. And then I'm also going to surround it with power generators just because it makes radars function more efficiently due to the adjacency bonus I mentioned. And then by that time, after you've queued your first engineer, you should have a second one rolling off the lines. Again, going to be pretty similar. I'm going to tell him to go maybe upwards this time, maybe snag this nice juicy piece of reclaim. I'll go over that in a second in more detail, but let's tell him to go capture that one and then maybe go capture these ones up here. And heck, if he stays alive, let's go tell him to capture these and maybe build some point defense through this template. I plan to make a video on templates in the future. If I've already done that by the time you're watching this video, it'll probably show in the top right in a card, or I'll link it down below. But this is basically just a point defense surrounded by walls. So that's my second engineer. My first engineer is going this way. I'm going to go ahead and speed it up just slightly for our third engineer to come off the line. And with this engineer, all I'm going to do with this guy, and actually the next one, is just reclaim. So I mentioned it a little bit with this nice juicy rock right there, but if you scroll out and press left control and left shift at the same time, just control shift, you can see where there's reclaim on the map. If you're just starting, this might not seem like a big deal, but I only have 100 mass in the bank and I'm losing it as we speak. If a tank takes 56 total mass to build, I can only build 2 tanks, and that's not even including any of this other stuff my commander is building, like mass extractors or factories. So if I can pick up this rock, this single rock, which is worth 75, that almost doubles essentially the amount of mass I have. So it's super important to get your engineers. Just scroll out and just look where there's mass. All you have to do is just hold the Alt button and send him on an attack move. If the engineer has this red line, he's going to scoop up any mass through these rocks or any of these trees which give power. He's going to scoop up any of that along the way, as long as you're not actively overflowing. And that will give you a nice little jump start into your economy to make sure that you don't stall as your commander is doing all this stuff in the base, or as you continue your production lines later. You're basically going to want to be reclaiming the entire game. Again, I'll get to that in a second, but let me go ahead and speed this up. This is the 3rd engineer we have out, and the 4th is about to roll off the assembly line in a few seconds. Bam. So same thing with this guy. I'm just going to scroll out. I have one going this way. Why don't we send this guy just up here somewhere? There's lots of juicy reclaim in this little canyon right there. So let's just send him there. And I don't know, maybe we want to send him over there first and then send him this way. All I'm doing right now, I'm holding Control and Shift to show the mass values. And then I'm holding the Alt button for the attack move. And I just gave him 2 attack moves. And that is going to be the, what is that, the 4th engineer? Yes, that's the 4th. And these next 2 engineers have very important jobs. This 5th engineer here is going to build up our power grid. And a lot of people like to do that by just building a row of power generators like that. I personally think that looks tacky and I prefer this grid method. Honestly, it doesn't matter too much as long as you remember to actually do it, because it is very easy to power stall and it's also very bad to power stall. Again, I'll link the templates video once I have it made, but I have this template that basically makes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 power generators, and just as a nice little added bonus, I throw in an energy storage into this template so that I can use my overcharge ability on the commander, because by default you don't have enough energy to use it. And that's going to be the 5th engineer. Very important job. That finished just in time for the 6th engineer here, which again has another important job, and this is going to be the guy that really starts to scale up your production. So generally you're going to want to have at least 5 land factories, just as a general rule. Let's go ahead and make this guy queue up 4. And that's going to be what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Honestly, if we want to feel fancy, we can queue up a couple more. So that's what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 9 land factories. Just scout your opponent to see how many they have. If you only build 5 and you scout your opponent and they have 9 like this, that's a bad sign. You're probably going to want to build some more yourself. And typically, right now my queue is empty. I would have done this in the beginning, but I wanted to talk about it in more detail. So I slowed down a little bit. After those first 6 engineers all have their orders, we're going to want to do a raiding party. And this isn't necessary per se, but I highly recommend you do this because raiding parties will tax the other person's brain power, and it's really easy to do. All you have to do is queue up a tank and accompany it with a land scout. And again, the reason we do that is because tanks can shoot farther than they can actually see. So if they're on the other end of the map over here, they can't see that much. But if you accompany a scout with him, that'll make him that much more dangerous. And you definitely want to do this. Scouts are pretty cheap, so try to just always send scouts in your main party and honestly in your main army as well. After that, I'm going to queue up another engineer just to keep production going. And let's do another raiding party engineer combo and maybe just one more for good measure. And I'll go ahead and speed this up again. In the meantime, we can queue up this factory over here. What do we want going with it? Well, let's just make some tanks and a scout and just put that on repeat. This is 5-to-1. And the reason we're not just doing one tank on infinite is, again, for exactly the same reason that we put a scout in the raiding party. It's because these tanks can shoot farther than they can actually see. So if they go beyond your radar's range, you're going to have to need to rely on this scout. So let's do that. While this third factory over here from this guy is being constructed, I usually like to tell it to just assist this factory, and then all that means is this one will just copy whatever this one's build queue is. So now we're down here. My raiding party is finished. I'm going to tell my land scout just to assist this tank, and now all I have to do is control this tank. All I'm going to do is send him to where I think the enemy's engineers will be. Again, this is the raiding party we have here, and we're just trying to pick off some of these lone engineers just like this. If they're unprotected, that is prime targets for these raiding parties. So I think my opponent might be somewhere along these front lines. So let's just go send this raiding party over there. While our next engineer comes off, let's go ahead and tell this guy to... Oh, that is weird. I do not even know what happened to our engineer that had this giant queue right there. I must have had him... Where on earth did he go? Is that this guy? I don't even know what happened to him. That is weird. Answer in the comments what happened to this guy. But yeah, we definitely want to continue our factory production. So that's why we work engineers into our initial build combo there. I don't even know what happened to him. It's not like he died either, because I'm not playing with any enemies. But next raiding party about to come off the assembly line. I'm going to speed it up a little bit more. The reason why we don't totally ring factories is like what you just saw here. It messes up the pathfinding of units. So the less you ring your factories, although it is adjacency bonus, it's actually a tangible defect. The tanks just run into the power generators and get stuck. And that can actually cost you some time and battles if every single tank is just constantly getting stuck. So we generally don't want to ring all of our factories all the way around like I actually used to do. I don't do that anymore. Instead, I do this power grid section. So I did that a little bit quickly, but this next engineer, who would normally be our 7th engineer, I believe, I'm telling him to assist this guy that is making factories. And honestly, let me tell this guy to queue up some more factories, because I don't know, he shouldn't have stopped in the first place. That should probably be fine. And I'll slow this down again because there's a lot going on behind the scenes happening quickly. The reason I have 2 engineers helping this factory is because if we look at how long this takes to build, if I hover over this, in the corner over here under the picture, you can see it says 1 minute over there. It takes 1 minute to build with 1 engineer, so if I add another engineer, that cuts the time down in half because it adds their 2 build time together, and so now this will build in 30 seconds. If you remember that we had this guy over here building power generators just all on his own, the reason we're building a power grid now instead of just manually doing 1 power generator, 1 factory, 1 power generator, 1 factory like we did in the initial base, you can do that. It's just a lot of overhead that happens very quickly, and beyond the initial core base, the initial core extractors, it's just too much brain tax to just do 1 power generator, 1 factory, 1 power generator, 1 factory. It's easier just to tell 1 unit to build some power and tell a couple other units to build a line of factories. And it's actually very specific how much we have on this. This 1 engineer is doing it because if we look over here, a power generator takes around 25 seconds to build. So if we have just 1 solo engineer just building a power grid, he's always going to stay ahead of these 2 guys, which if you remember, one of them takes 60 seconds to build a factory, 2 of them together cuts that in half. These guys will build a factory in 30 seconds. This guy will build a power generator in just under 30 seconds. You're always going to be ahead on your eco. And guys, honestly, at this point, you're past the initial build orders phase. Now it's all about scaling everything up, building more units, and seeing what the opponent's doing and reacting to it. So this second scouting party just finished. Let's get this guy over to where I think some more engineers will be. Maybe we have 1 over here. Maybe I bet he's going to send some more engineers to that mass pile. This engineer, at this point, I'm pretty much just telling engineers to go just find their own reclaim, unless I need them for something to do, in which case, if I need radar or PD or something, I can just find an engineer that's on a reclaim mission, and I can just tell him to go do something. But other than that, this air factory, similar to how I like to put scouts into my land factory queue, really easy to just put an air scout into your interceptor queue as well, and then that way you don't have to worry about scouting. If you ever just scrolled out and you try to select all your air units, maybe it's a hotkey, maybe it's just selecting them, and then you accidentally select a scout as well, that's just a good reminder to select your scout and tell him to go scout your base. And then as your scout flies over, just try to look and see what your opponent has. If your opponent has way more factories than you, obviously it's a signal to build more factories. This one looks like it's not actually assisting. I think what happened earlier is instead of telling the factory to assist, I accidentally told the engineer to assist a factory. That's exactly what it was. So I meant to have the factory assist this one, and similar, you'll see it in this. I have the factory selected. I can pre-queue it to assist this factory, and then once it finishes, it'll automatically start. Let's waypoint these factories somewhere useful like the front lines. That way my units won't just be sitting in my base. My commander's starting to go off. He finished his whole build. And honestly, if you look at our economy, we're doing pretty well right now. We're in a really strong starting spot. We're floating energy, which is fine. And we're about halfway on our mass storage, which is good, honestly. It shows we're not in danger of stalling mass, but you also don't want to overflow mass either. You want to keep it just about probably in the middle there. It's probably pretty healthy. At this point, I'll scroll out and double click on my mass extractors, and I'll tell them to start upgrading. Really important to pause them all after that. And the reason I do this, it was in my tips and tricks videos. You basically always want to be upgrading one of these if you have the power to do so. And as long as you can remember to always be upgrading one if you're able to, that will keep you in a pretty good spot economically, and it'll just make it so that you scale without really having to think about it. These red circle things are pretty in your face, and it's just a reminder just to say, oh hey, okay, if I'm able to, every time you scroll into your base, just find one of these red circle things, and if you're not currently upgrading one, if this finishes or something, just unpause another one. Just be aware, upgrading these is pretty energy intensive. It takes 60 power per tick to upgrade this, so if you want to unpause it, just make sure you have enough energy to do so. Again, you don't want to energy stall, but in general, always be upgrading one mass extractor, just always, the whole game pretty much. Once you upgrade everything to T2, then you're going to want to go ahead and ring them. So again, this is something I have a template for, but once they're at Tech 2, you want to ring them all. Might be a little bit early to queue all the rings now because they're still only Tech 1, but ringing them not only gives you more storage, but it also makes them more efficient. And then once you have all your T2 ringed mass extractors, then you're going to want to be upgrading them to T3. But again, it's a little bit early to ring these since they're still all Tech 1, so I'll put him back on his Explore command. Hey, look at this, we have our first interceptor coming off and we're still floating power. That is awesome. This factory, let's just go ahead and tell him to assist. And now that this initial build queue is done, I typically like to just infinitely produce engineers. And really, it's never too bad to have too many engineers. Worst case, you just send them on an attack move across the map and they'll scoop up any tanks on the front line. Right now, there's no reclaim at the front line because there's no enemy, but you're going to be battling pretty much the entire game, and you kind of want engineers on the front line to be able to scoop up all the carcasses. If I kill a couple of these guys, sorry tanks, they drop 80% of their mass value, 45 mass. So if you have dozens and dozens of tanks that are dying on the front line, you're going to want to have engineers there to scoop up all that mass, because again, 80% of the mass into your economy or into upgrading mass extractors, that's huge. So that's what I typically like to do with this one, and it just makes it so that you never really have to worry about building projects. You're always going to have engineers around to do stuff. So if I want to expand this way, then every few seconds I'm going to have an engineer down here. All I do is just tell him to do these things. I tell him to get this mass extractor. I use my hotkey to select the hydrocarbon power plant, and let's tell him to build these ones just for fun. Maybe he'll die, but if he does die, then it doesn't really matter. We can just select another one. They're always available. So with that, guys, we're in a pretty strong spot right now. Again, at this point, it's really just going to depend on what your opponent's doing. If your opponent's going heavy into air, maybe you want to build another air factory. If your opponent has like 8 factories already, that's a signal to you to just get your production lines going even faster. But if you follow all this stuff, you're going to be in a really good spot. Again, mainly, if you just remember to have enough power to do whatever you're doing, you're going to be in a pretty good spot, guys. Something we could do if we don't want to make as many factories, we could just upgrade this thing. And then if I take that off infinite repeat and make even just 2 or 3 engineers of the next tech level is really all you need, then we have this one upgrading. And look, our economy is still doing pretty well. This should be, looks like I canceled that at some point, but that should have been finished about now if I didn't cancel it, or maybe I forgot to start it, honestly. But that should be Tech 2 by now. Then that's a signal to go start this next one. And honestly, guys, you're off to the races at this point. It really just depends on what your opponent's doing. And just looking at the map, don't forget this radar. If you notice, I have these blue lines on, and all that is just this menu up here, just showing me intel. You can turn that on and off pretty easily with just this button right here. Turns it on and off. If you want to turn the military ones on as well, it shows you your ranges of all your units. But I kind of like to have the radar ones on just so I know where my gap in coverage is. I have this main central radar right here, but I have gaps in coverage along the sides of the map like this. So if this was a fogged map, my opponent could do like some transport drop or something like that, and he could transport behind my base and maybe kill my power grid. That'd be really bad. So this is just kind of a reminder to me to build some radar maybe down here, maybe up here. Couple last things I want to mention. You should generally build support units as well. So that's pretty easy. All you do is pick a factory and you can just make some support units on infinite repeat. I usually like to do these ones and then a scout as well as an engineer, just to have the engineer on the front lines or wherever the waypoint is so he can reclaim carcasses faster. Or alternatively, if I subtract these guys out, you can also build that into your kind of central main factory hub as well. So for instance, I have the 5 and a land scout right now. What if I wanted the 5 and then I just wanted anti-air artillery, and then again just a land scout, which you already have, and an engineer, and then that's probably going to be not quite enough tanks. So let's just add 5 more tanks, maybe a couple more tanks than that, and now this is what, 12 tanks, 1 anti-air, 1 artillery, 1 engineer, and 1 land scout. That's probably a fine ratio, and that's a ratio that all of these other factories are going to help with as well. They're all going to produce that same ratio. Again, either way works fine, whether you just want all these factories producing tanks and you want a support factory, or whether you want them all just to follow this main queue, really up to you. But other than that, my words of wisdom would be check this bar up here. If you right click it, it'll take you to any idle engineer. You never really want to see any idle engineers or idle factories here, because those are things that can be doing literally anything. Anything is better than just sitting around. So even these 2 juicy rocks I recognize are 75. Let's go tell him to reclaim, and then just go reclaim somewhere. This other one, let's see what he's doing. Looks like he finished his build queue. I haven't reclaimed these neutral bases, but those are also usually pretty juicy. So maybe let's have this guy do that. And real quick, just since I did tech up this factory that was infinite repeating engineers, you're probably going to want to grab some random factory and just override whatever it's doing to engineers, just so you have a constant flow of engineers. Again, they really can't hurt to have them, and they're only going to help you. Worst case, they go to the front lines and reclaim whatever on the front lines. But now that this one is an HQ, we're probably going to start pumping out some Tech 2 units. Maybe we start teching some of these up and making Tech 2 units out of these ones. Or maybe we start teching this one up to Tech 2 as well. but we are just over 7 minutes into this game. We have 6 land factories, we have an air factory up and working, and we are well on our way to Tech 2 already. All of that with being very positive in our economy, very healthy, and if you follow these instructions, you should do just fine in any competitive games that you play on Supreme Commander. The only last thing I have to mention is a Hydro Rush, which is when you have a hydrocarbon that is in your main base. This one did not have it, but if you do have a hydrocarbon in the main base, treat this like 5 power generators that's super cheap. So it's going to be a little bit different. You're actually going to want to build all your core mexes with your commander first, and then just go have your commander assist the construction of this hydrocarbon. It's a little bit different, so instead of doing 2, 2, 2, 2, build all the mexes and then just build the hydrocarbon. But basically, again, treat this as 5 power generators that's only like 1.5 times as expensive as a regular power generator to build. So it's just so efficient, and it's so cheap to build that you're basically always going to want to do that special hydrocarbon rush, it's called. Again, nothing too crazy. Build the mass extractors first, then tell the commander to assist the hydrocarbon. Other than that, it's identical. Just treat the hydrocarbon as 5 of these guys. But that is really it, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Again, if I forgot anything or if you have anything else to add, leave a comment down below. Consider joining my new friendly Discord server where we play community games. We have coaches on there that are 2,000 plus rated players. So if you have any questions, head over there and we'll be happy to help out. But other than that, I will see you in the next video.